All right, so I've started making bread. Here's a sample time which I will give you. It doesn't matter what time you start, just know that if you start at 8 a.m., for example, you won't be done until 6 p.m. So if you start in the afternoon, you'll be making bread well into the night. So the first thing I do is take my mature starter, which I have here. I mix it up and make sure everything's well incorporated. It's still active looking, you can see all the bubbles. And then I put, if you're making 2 loaves, 2 large loaves or 4 small loaves, you're going to follow the top instruction. I've also had different sizes for different recipes and how many you want. But for, let's say 2 large loaves or 1 large loaf and 2 small loaves, we're going to take 35 grams of the mature starter, put it in there. I have slightly more, but it's really okay. It's a bit colder, so I'm adding a little bit more starter to kind of give it a little boost, but it's not a science exactly, but anywhere between 35 and 50 I'd say is fine. Now I'm going to add my all-purpose bread flour. Make sure it's unbleached, where it might kill the starter and the yeast. So I zero the scale, and let's add 35 grams. All right, let's zero it again, and now I'm gonna add whole wheat, equal parts, so another 35 grams. Let's see, okay, it's close enough. And now we're gonna zero it again, and we're going to add 70 grams or 2 times the amount of room temperature or very slightly lukewarm water. Be careful because 70 grams sneaks up quickly with water. Now just take your starter mix or your leaven and just mix it all together. Now all you want to do is mix it till it's incorporated. You don't have to over mix it because it's really going to settle and do its own thing. So I'd say that this is about the consistency you'd want it. And once that is done, then you're just going to add, you're gonna put tea towel or saran wrap just over it. And what I like to do is put it into the oven since it's cooler out, and just keep the light on. And if you keep the light on, it will bring up the temperature to about 70 degrees in there, so it's perfect. So now it's in the oven with the light on, so I'm going to set my timer 3.5 hours, at which point we will start mixing the flour with water, which is called auto-leasing, while this leaven continues to ferment. And then afterwards, once it's auto-leased, the dough and the water will mix them together and start the proofing process. Okay, so it has been 3.5 hours, and the leaven has been resting in the oven with the light on. Let's take a look at it, and you can see that it is active, and there's some bubbles there coming up. You feel it's warm, so you know it's active. Keep it covered. So now what we're going to do is auto-lease the dough, the flour and the water. So in here, I have, according to the recipe, a total of 804 plus 75 grams of flour. The recipe calls for 804 grams of bread flour and 75 grams of whole wheat flour. Now, because I kind of changed things, I've mixed it up and I changed the ratio. You can do 50-50 if you want more whole wheat, or you can keep it like this Here I kind of kept 600 grams of bread flour and did the rest with whole wheat flour. So once you get this all weighed out, you're going to add 700 grams of water. I've already started adding a little bit in there just because I ran out of room, but you add your 700 grams of water just directly in there. And what you want to do is mix it very lightly. You're not trying to create gluten, but you're just trying to make it incorporated so that all the flour hydrates. And that's what auto-leasing is. So you could take a claw-like grip like this, and you just go in there, and you just mix it like this until you get about a shaggy dough, I'd say, and that's all you need to do. So now I've mixed it using the claw technique and a few flips and rotations, and this is the consistency you want. You kind of want to see it shaggy like this. You don't want any gluten to really develop, or it's going to be overworked. But all the flour has been mixed with the water, and it's going to hydrate over time. So now just take your tea towel, cover it up, and place it in the oven with the light on, with the leaven, and you're going to auto-lease it for an hour and a half. And afterwards, we're going to mix it. So while the dough is auto-leasing, some things I like to do during this hour and a half is start to make the salt mixture. Now you want to make sure you do not add the salt while it is auto-leasing, and what you're going to do if you do that is you're going to essentially kill off the yeast. So let's get our measuring cup, tear it off to 0, and we're going to add 18 grams for this recipe of 2 loaves of, let me just change the units to grams of flour. So we have 18 grams, close enough, and we're just going to mix it. I like using the hot water. It's about, an 1/8 of a cup of hot water like this, giving a stir just so it incorporates, and you kind of leave this slurry to mix. It'll just be easier when you mix it in with the dough so that it, gets distributed a bit more even than it would if you just added the salt and the water at the end. So you can leave this slurry mixture to melt the salt while you wait for your dough to auto-lease. So now the timer is done, and we're going to take the leaven and mix it with the auto-leased dough. So what you could do is just make some holes, and then we're gonna pour the leaven on top. Okay, now the leaven's in there, so we're gonna use our fingers to mix it. You could take some water in your other hand. We get your hands wet, and we're gonna do some kind of slap and folds. So what you want to do is make sure the leaven is mixed with the auto-leased dough, and you don't want it to dry out. So I'm just gonna add some water just so that it hydrates properly until it's a bit loose, easy to work with. So what I'm gonna do are these kind of slap and folds to mix everything. So you can take the dough, hold it like this from the middle, let the weight of it drop over, and go down, slap it, and do it again at the 90-degree. Just gonna do it several times, probably for about, I'd say like a minute or so, because every time you do it, you're turning the dough out and pulling, so more of the leaven gets incorporated in there. Afterwards, it should look like this. Make sure you do not put any of the salt in there. You don't want to kill all the yeast that you made. So let it rest covered 25 minutes in the oven with the light on. Okay, now it's rested for 25 minutes, so we're gonna add our salt mixture. wet hands is usually the easiest way to work with it. So add the salt mixture from before. Get your hands wet. Lift it up from underneath. And we're gonna do some slap and folds to incorporate it. So you can just take it like this first and slap it against the side. And what you're doing is just mixing it all together. So once you get it slap and folded a few times, then you can do some different type of slap and fold. So similar to before, mix from the middle and bring it down, slap it the way down so you get it all incorporated. So you can do this for about a minute or so, and then we're going to let it ferment all together back in the oven, and we're going to do our stretch and folds, which occur every 15 minutes for the first 3, and then every 30 minutes for the last 3 before you leave it to bulk ferment. So once it's all mixed up, let's let it rest. So after you slap and fold it for about 2-3 minutes, it should look like this. Set your timer for 15 minutes and put it back into the warm oven covered, and we will do our first fold in 15 minutes. Okay, it's been 15 minutes, so we're gonna do our first stretch and fold. Take wet hands, grab one side of it, pull it up like that, fold it over, do it on the top, fold it over, do it on the side, fold it over, do it on the other side, fold it over, and that's it. Set your timer for 15 more minutes, and we're going to do it 2 more times at 15 minutes, then 3 more times at 30-minute increments. So altogether, you're folding it 6 times, half at 15, half at 30-minute increments. So now I just did the last final fold, and it has the bulk ferment for 2 hours and 10 minutes. You can see this is how it should look. It should be smooth like this, and you can start seeing bubbles here of the active yeast. So let it sit covered again in the warm place for 2 hours, 10 minutes. This is the bulk ferment, and this is where it will do most of its rising. So when we come back, it should be twice the size, and if it's not, we'll let it sit a little more. It depends on the weather. Okay, it's been 2 hours and 10 minutes, and the dough is bubbly and nice. So we take our banetones and we add some rice flour. Sprinkle it in there, especially at the bottom. If you're using a ring, especially on the bottom, so it doesn't stick to it. You don't really want regular flour because the regular flour would just combine with this. So you want something fine, like the sweet rice flour. So take your dough and put it out onto a table or a chopping block. Now using our bench scraper, first we're gonna take a little bit of flour, just gonna run it down the middle where you're gonna cut it. Take your bench scraper and just separate, since we're doing a recipe that has 2 loaves, we can separate it into 2 loaves and separate them. Now you're gonna take your separated dough. It's gonna be very, very sticky, so just get ready. Separate them out, and what we're going to do is we're going to fold them. So taking them the long way, we're gonna take the top edge, go 1, 2, the middle, 1, 2, the bottom, 1, 2, and the last 2, 1, 2, about 6 times. Fold it in on itself. Again, it's gonna be sticky. Just gonna work it like this into a rough circle. So now you can take some flour, dust it on the top so it doesn't stick, and just keep on kind of twisting it like this, folding it so that you're creating a seam underneath, and you could keep adding more flour so you can get it so it doesn't stick on your hands. So now you see I'm working it, pulling it down itself, creating a boule. So right now this boule is good. We're gonna leave it there, not too tight. It's gonna sit there for 10 minutes. We're gonna do the same thing to the other one. Okay, now our boules have rested for 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes. Add some flour on top. Just get a nice layer there. And we'll do the same thing and shape it so that they become tight inside with 2 hands. And then I'm just going to flip it over onto the panettone. So what you do to tighten it is you take 2 hands like this, and you just go like this, tucking it underneath, and you get a nice tight boule. Do the same to the other one, and essentially this becomes the bottom. Now if you have a ring like this, what you're gonna do is just take some flour, put it on your elbow like that, clean elbow, and you just make a hole like this. Take it, trying to keep that bottom, so not trying to flip it over like that, folding it under itself, and then flipping it into the panettone. Same thing with the other one. This one's just a plain one, so we're just gonna take it, flip it in there. Now these come with covers that you can put on them, so we're just going to cover each one. Now they are both covered. This one is a ring. Just going to stack it, put it in the fridge for anywhere from, let's say, 12 to 14 hours. You can stretch it to 18 hours if you need. 12 to 14 hours in the fridge. Next day we will bake it. So it has been about 13 hours, and I'm going to bake the bread now. So the first thing we do is we preheat the oven for 500 degrees. You're going to be baking it in Dutch ovens. So I have 2 Dutch ovens. If you don't have 2 Dutch ovens, you can just use one and, bake it twice instead of having 2 going at the same time. Now, the only thing you have to do is, as you preheat this, when it comes up to temperature, you're going to want to let it sit in the oven and really get hot for about 30, 45, an hour. So let that Dutch oven just get hot, get really warm before we do anything else. So right now it's preheating. Your oven may be a little different, so you may have to add a little more temperature. For my oven, I actually set at 510. Just because I know it's not going to really be as hot as I'd like it to. So get your Dutch ovens in there and just preheat it. Once it reaches temperature, let it sit for 45 minutes to an hour to get really hot. So the oven's been on for about an hour at 500 degrees. I've taken the cold bread out of the oven. Out of the refrigerator. So now we're just gonna add some flour to the bottom so it doesn't stick, and we flip it over. And we're going to, so now I've turned it out and I have tucked it in again like how we did yesterday, so the bottom becomes tight. You could take some more flour, put it on top, and you're just gonna cover it like this so you get a nice layer. Then you're going to take a razor blade and score it however you like, but you have to do quick cuts about 1/8 of an inch down. So for this one, I'll just go 1, 2, 3, 4, and for this one, I'll do just a cross pattern. Now we're gonna get our hot Dutch ovens out of the oven. I've got my really hot pans out. I'm gonna put some flour, and now I'm gonna put the bread in. Bread is in, just throw it in, don't try and handle it. Cover it. Now we go into the oven at 500 or so degrees for about 25 to 27 minutes. It has been 25 minutes and we're going to lower the temperature and take off the tops so that it can brown. This part really does depend on your oven and how you're looking at it. So it's risen, but now we're gonna brown it. And the rule of a general rule would be about 20 to even 25, 26, 27 minutes. I'm gonna do it for 23 minutes. Just make sure you lower the temperature to about 480, which works for me. 475 is what the recipe calls for, but 480 works for me. And I'll set my timer to 23 minutes. So I had it in the oven at 475 for about 26 minutes. Afterwards, I just cranked it up to broil because it wasn't brown enough, and I let it sit in there for about 2 more minutes. So you can see whatever level finish you want it, if you want it really dark and crunchy or if you want a little bit on the softer side. But once it's done, just let it cool, and that's it.